The security footage timestamp read 2:47 a.m. But for Jasmine Washington Sterling, time had stopped the moment she saw her husband of 8 years slip into her sister's bedroom, his pale hand already reaching for the light switch with the familiarity of someone who'd done this before. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comment where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy this story, because tomorrow, I have another beautiful story to share with you and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Now, let's get into the story. The morning sun painted golden stripes across the marble countertops of the Sterling mansion's kitchen, where Jasmine Washington Sterling stood preparing her husband's coffee exactly the way he liked it. 2 sugars, a splash of cream, served in the china cup his grandmother had left him. Her dark fingers moved with practiced precision, the emerald silk of her blouse catching the light as she reached for the sterling silver spoon that bore his family's crest. Everything in this house bore his family's crest. Everything except her. Morning, beautiful. Richard Sterling's voice carried that familiar warmth that had first drawn her to him at Howard University 12 years ago, when he was the idealistic white law student volunteering at the community legal clinic, and she was the ambitious black economics major who challenged every assumption he'd ever held about the world. She turned, offering him the smile that had graced the covers of Ebony and Essence magazines when they'd married, the power couple that defied conventional expectations. Good morning, honey. Sleep well. Like a baby. Richard accepted the coffee, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. At 42, he still carried himself with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no, never been made to feel less than. His Sterling Industries empire had grown from a small tech startup to a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, and every morning he wore that success like a perfectly tailored suit. Jasmine had helped build that empire. Her economics degree from Howard, her MBA from Wharton, her intuitive understanding of market dynamics, all of it had contributed to Sterling Industries' meteoric rise. But when the business magazines wrote their profiles, they focused on Richard's innovative leadership and mentioned her as supportive spouse and former consultant. Keisha texted last night, Jasmine said, wiping down the already spotless counter. She's planning to stay another week. Says she's finally feeling settled in the guest wing. Something flickered across Richard's face, so quickly that if Jasmine hadn't been looking directly at him, she would have missed it. But she had been looking, the way a woman learns to look when she's spent 8 years trying to decode the man she married. That's great, he said, taking a long sip of coffee. She's been through so much with the divorce. Kevin really did a number on her. Keisha, her baby sister by 3 years, who'd always been the wild one, the one who took risks while Jasmine calculated outcomes. When Keisha's marriage had imploded 6 months ago, Jasmine had insisted she come stay with them. What was the point of having a 20-room mansion if you couldn't help family? I was thinking we could all have dinner together tonight, Jasmine continued, studying Richard's reflection in the coffee pot's polished surface. Just the 3 of us. Like old times. Can't tonight, babe. Board meeting ran long yesterday, and I need to review the Morrison acquisition files. Rain check. Always work. Always another deal, another meeting, another crisis that required his immediate attention. In the early years, Jasmine had admired his dedication. Now, she wondered when dedication had become avoidance. Of course, she said, keeping her voice light. I understand. Richard set down his cup and moved behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders. In the reflection of the kitchen window, they looked like the perfect couple, him tall and commanding in his charcoal suit, her elegant and poised in emerald silk. The American dream realized, breaking barriers and building bridges. You know I love you, right? His voice carried a strange urgency, and his grip on her shoulders tightened almost imperceptibly. I know. But as she spoke the words, something cold settled in her stomach. Why did it sound like goodbye? His phone buzzed against the marble counter, and Richard released her immediately. That's my car. Kiss for luck. She turned, offering her cheek, but he caught her chin and kissed her lips instead, soft, lingering, desperate. When he pulled away, his eyes held something she couldn't quite name. Have a good day, Mrs. Sterling. She watched him leave through the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a perfect view of the circular driveway. The black Mercedes purred to life, carrying him toward downtown Atlanta and another day of building his empire. Their empire, she corrected herself, though the correction felt increasingly hollow. The house settled into silence around her. 20 rooms, each decorated by the finest interior designers money could buy, each one a testament to Richard's success and taste. Sometimes Jasmine felt like another piece of his collection, beautiful, valuable, perfectly positioned to reflect well on the collector. She climbed the sweeping staircase to the second floor, her heels clicking against marble that had been imported from Italy. The sound echoed in the vast space, a lonely percussion that followed her down the hall past oil paintings of Richard's ancestors, stern-faced white men who'd built their fortunes on cotton and tobacco, men who would have owned people who looked like her just a few generations ago. Her office occupied the corner of the east wing, with windows that looked out over the manicured gardens and the swimming pool where she'd once imagined teaching children to swim. The children that never came, despite years of trying, despite the fertility treatments and the specialists and the mounting disappointment that neither of them talked about anymore. Jasmine powered up her laptop and opened the quarterly reports for the Sterling Foundation, the charitable arm of Richard's empire that she'd been running for the past 5 years. On paper, it looked impressive: millions donated to education initiatives, healthcare programs, community development projects. In reality, it felt like elaborate penance, as if they could offset the inequality their wealth represented by writing checks to organizations that served people who looked like her. What do you think about the balance between personal success and community responsibility? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. The morning passed in a blur of emails and conference calls, meetings with program directors and grant recipients. Jasmine had gotten good at this, the careful orchestration of philanthropy, the delicate dance of giving back without giving up power. But today, something felt off. She found herself distracted, her mind returning to Richard's strange behavior at breakfast, the way he'd held her shoulders, the goodbye kiss that felt like an ending. At noon, she decided to take a break. The house's security system was state-of-the-art, cameras in every common area, motion sensors, the works. Richard had insisted on it after Sterling Industries went public and his profile had risen. "Can't be too careful," he'd said. "There are a lot of people who'd love to see us fail." Jasmine had access to the security feeds through an app on her phone, something she rarely used except to check if packages had been delivered or to see if the landscaping crew had finished their work. But today, something made her open the app and scroll through the previous night's footage. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m. There was Richard in his study, still in his work clothes, poring over documents. Normal. Expected. 12:15 a.m. Richard climbing the stairs to their bedroom. She remembered hearing him come in, remembered the soft kiss he'd pressed to her temple as she pretended to sleep. 12:43 a.m. Their bedroom was dark, Richard presumably asleep beside her. And then, 2:47 a.m. The guest wing hallway. Jasmine's finger hovered over the play button. Something in her chest tightened, a premonition of disaster that made her want to close the app and pretend she'd never opened it. But she couldn't. The way Richard had looked at her that morning, the strange desperation in his voice, it all pointed to this moment, this choice. She pressed play. The hallway was dimly lit by the automatic night lights, but she could see clearly enough. A figure in white boxer shorts and a grey t-shirt, Richard's pajamas, the ones she'd bought him for Christmas, moving quietly down the hall toward the guest suite where Keisha was staying. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she watched her husband approach her sister's door. He paused, looking back toward the main house as if checking to make sure he hadn't been followed. Then his hand reached for the door handle. It turned easily. Unlocked. Expected. The camera angle didn't show inside the room, but it captured the moment Richard slipped inside, closing the door softly behind him. The timestamp continued to roll. 2:48 a.m., 2:49 a.m., 2:50 a.m. Jasmine fast-forwarded, her thumb shaking as she manipulated the controls. The hallway remained empty for 43 minutes. Then, at 3:30 a.m., the door opened again. Richard emerged, his hair mussed, his t-shirt slightly askew. He moved quickly now, no longer concerned with stealth, heading back toward the main house with the satisfied gait of a man who'd gotten what he came for. The phone slipped from Jasmine's fingers, clattering against the hardwood floor of her office. The sound seemed to echo forever in the vast space, bouncing off the expensive furnishings and the family photos that now looked like lies. 8 years of marriage. 8 years of building something together, of being the power couple that defied expectations and broke barriers. 8 years of loving a man who was sneaking into her sister's room at 2:47 in the morning. Her sister. Her own flesh and blood. The girl she'd raised after their parents died in a car accident when Keisha was only 16. The girl she'd put through college, supported through heartbreak, opened her home to when her world fell apart. Jasmine stood on unsteady legs and walked to the window that overlooked the pool. The water sparkled in the afternoon sun, crystal clear and perfectly still, like the life she'd thought she was living until 4 to 7 minutes ago. But as she stood there, something began to shift inside her chest. The shock was giving way to something else, something colder and more calculating. The economics major who'd graduated summa cum laude, the MBA who'd helped build a billion-dollar empire, the woman who'd spent 8 years learning every detail of her husband's business. That woman was beginning to wake up. Richard Sterling thought he was clever. He thought she was just the beautiful wife, the perfect accessory, the charitable foundation runner who looked good in family photos. He'd underestimated her the same way men had been underestimating her all her life. But he was about to learn exactly what Jasmine Washington Sterling was capable of when someone made the mistake of betraying her. The empire he'd built with her help. She was about to take it apart piece by piece. And she was going to enjoy every moment of it. Jasmine's hands were steady as she poured herself a glass of wine from the bottle of Chateau Margaux that Richard had been saving for their anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on her. Celebrating the end of her marriage with wine meant to commemorate its beginning. But steady hands were a learned skill, developed through years of charity galas and board meetings where showing weakness meant losing ground. She'd spent the last 3 hours methodically reviewing security footage, going back weeks, then months. What she'd found painted a picture that made her stomach turn and her resolve crystallize into something diamond-hard. The first incident she could identify was from 2 months ago, just 3 weeks after Keisha had moved in. Richard leaving their bedroom at 1:15 a.m., returning at 2:33 a.m. She'd marked it in a spreadsheet, because Jasmine Washington Sterling documented everything, noting the time stamps, duration, and Richard's behavior the following day. Then there was the night from 6 weeks ago when she'd had the flu. Richard had been so attentive, bringing her soup, checking her temperature, insisting she rest. While she'd been grateful for his care, the security footage told a different story. At 11:47 p.m., while she'd been knocked out on cold medicine, he'd made his first visit to Keisha's room. He'd stayed for 2 hours and 14 minutes. Her phone buzzed with a text from Keisha. "Hey sis. Going shopping with some girlfriends. Won't be back until late. Don't wait up." Perfect. Jasmine needed time to think, to plan, to decide exactly how she was going to destroy the man who'd spent months making a fool of her in her own home. She walked through the house with new eyes, seeing it not as the dream home they'd built together, but as the crime scene it had become. Every surface, every corner, every carefully chosen piece of art now felt contaminated by the knowledge of what had been happening under this roof. In the guest wing, she stood outside Keisha's door. Her hand hovered over the handle the same way Richard's had in the security footage. But unlike him, she had every right to enter this room. This was her house, bought with money from the empire she'd helped build. The door opened to reveal a space that looked lived in a way that spoke of comfort and permanence. Keisha's clothes were scattered across the antique chair, her makeup covering the vanity table, her books stacked on the nightstand. It looked like the room of someone who'd made herself at home. Too much at home. Jasmine moved to the dresser, her fingers trailing over perfume bottles and jewelry boxes. In the top drawer, beneath silk scarves and lingerie, she found what she was looking for, a burner phone she'd never seen before. The text history made her knees weak. "Richard, can't stop thinking about this morning, Keisha. We have to be more careful. Jasmine almost caught us in the kitchen yesterday, Richard. She doesn't suspect anything. She trusts us both too much, Keisha. Sometimes I feel guilty." "Richard, don't. What we have is real. I never felt this way with her." Jasmine sat heavily on the bed that her husband had been sharing with her sister. The silk comforter was expensive, Egyptian cotton sheets she'd chosen herself when decorating this room. She'd wanted Keisha to feel welcomed, loved, supported during her difficult time. The phone buzzed in her hand. A new message from Richard. "Tonight. Same time. I need you." The response came quickly from Keisha. "Yes. I'll leave the door unlocked." Jasmine stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then, very carefully, she deleted both messages and put the phone back where she'd found it. No evidence of her discovery. Not yet. Back in her office, she opened her laptop and began to type. If Richard Sterling wanted to play games, she'd show him what happened when someone with her intelligence and resources decided to play back. Sterling Industries' corporate structure was complex, holding companies, subsidiaries, international partnerships, and shell corporations that had been designed to minimize taxes and maximize profits. Jasmine had helped create many of these structures during the early years of their marriage, back when she'd been more than just the foundation runner. But what Richard didn't know was that she'd never stopped paying attention. Every quarterly report, every board meeting summary, every strategic planning session, she'd read them all. While he thought she was just playing the role of dutiful wife, she'd been studying his empire, learning its vulnerabilities. Sterling Industries was built on 3 pillars: government contracts, private sector partnerships, and international investments. Each pillar had its own weaknesses, its own pressure points, and Jasmine knew exactly where to apply force to bring the whole structure down. She started with the government contracts. Sterling Industries held a $2.3 billion contract with the Department of Defense for cybersecurity services. It was the kind of contract that required extensive background checks, security clearances, and moral character evaluations. The kind of contract that could be revoked if certain information came to light. Jasmine opened a secure email account and began typing. To whom it may concern, I have reason to believe that Richard Sterling, CEO of Sterling Industries, may be compromising the security of classified government systems through his personal conduct. I have documentation that suggests he has been engaging in activities that could make him vulnerable to blackmail or coercion. She didn't send it. Not yet. But she saved it to drafts, along with the security footage and photographs of the burner phone messages. Next, she turned her attention to the private partnerships. Sterling Industries' biggest client was Hartwell Corporation, a Fortune 500 company run by James Hartwell, a man whose wife, Patricia, was famously religious and conservative. The Hartwells had built their brand on family values and moral leadership. They would not be pleased to learn that their primary contractor was having an affair with his wife's sister. Dear Mrs. Hartwell, as someone who shares your commitment to family values, I felt compelled to share some disturbing information about one of your husband's business partners. Another draft saved. Another weapon prepared. The international investments were trickier, but Jasmine had always been good with numbers. Sterling Industries had significant holdings in overseas markets, many of them structured through tax haven countries. While perfectly legal, these arrangements relied on discretion and stability. A high-profile scandal, a messy divorce, media attention. Any of these could spook international partners and trigger costly restructuring. Mr. Chen, I hope this message finds you well. I wanted to personally reach out regarding some upcoming changes at Sterling Industries that may affect our partnership agreements. As she worked, Jasmine felt something she hadn't experienced in years: the thrill of the game. This was what she'd been trained for. What she'd excelled at before marriage had channeled her ambitions into supporting someone else's dreams. She was remembering what it felt like to be the smartest person in the room, to see patterns and possibilities that others missed. Her phone rang. Richard's name appeared on the screen, along with the photo from their honeymoon in Santorini. They'd looked so happy, so sure of their future together. Hey, honey, she answered, her voice perfectly steady. Just wanted to hear your voice, he said, and she could hear traffic in the background. I know I've been working a lot lately. I don't tell you enough how much I appreciate you. You don't have to say that. Yes, I do. You're the foundation of everything, Jas. You know that, right? Everything I've built, it's all been for us. For our life together. The lies came so easily to him, so naturally. How long had he been practicing this performance? I love you too, she said, because what else could she say? The truth. That she knew exactly what he'd been doing at 2:47 a.m. for the past 2 months. That she was currently planning the systematic destruction of everything he'd worked for. I'll try to be home for dinner tomorrow night, he continued. The 3 of us, like you wanted. That sounds perfect. After he hung up, Jasmine stared at her reflection in the laptop screen. The woman looking back at her was still beautiful, still poised, still wearing the emerald silk blouse that had started this day. But something in her eyes had changed. The trust was gone, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. What would you do if you discovered the person you trusted most had betrayed you with someone you loved? Share your thoughts below. Sometimes the people closest to us can hurt us the deepest. She opened a new document and began typing a different kind of message. Marcus Williams, investigative reporter, Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Mr. Williams, I have a story that I believe would be of interest to your readers. It involves corporate malfeasance, government contracts, and the kind of personal scandal that brings down empires. But as her fingers moved across the keyboard, Jasmine realized that media exposure was just one tool in her arsenal. She had something much more powerful: knowledge. She knew Richard's business better than anyone except Richard himself. She knew his weaknesses, his fears, his pressure points. More importantly, she knew his secrets. Not just the affair, though that was certainly damaging enough, but the other secrets. The corners that had been cut to win government contracts. The tax strategies that skirted the edge of legality. The overseas partnerships that relied on relationships with questionable characters. Richard Sterling had built his empire on a foundation of carefully managed risk. He'd always been willing to push boundaries, to find the grey areas where profit lived. Jasmine had watched him do it, had sometimes helped him navigate those grey areas with her economic analysis and strategic thinking. Now she was going to use that knowledge to destroy him. The front door chimed, indicating someone had entered. Jasmine quickly closed her laptop and walked to the security monitor. Keisha was back from her shopping trip, loaded down with bags from expensive boutiques. She looked happy, glowing even, in a way that now made perfect sense. Jasmine watched her sister climb the stairs toward the guest wing, probably to prepare for another night with Richard. The same Richard who would come home in a few hours, kiss Jasmine on the cheek, eat the dinner she'd prepared, and then sneak out of their bedroom to sleep with her sister. But not tonight. Tonight, Jasmine had other plans. She walked to her closet and selected a black dress, simple, elegant, the kind of dress she wore to funerals. Because in a way, that's what tonight would be, the funeral of her marriage, her trust, her old life. But it would also be a birth. The birth of Jasmine Washington Sterling as something new, something harder, something infinitely more dangerous than the accommodating wife she'd been for 8 years. Richard Sterling thought he was clever, thought he could have his cake and eat it too. He thought he could keep his perfect wife for appearances while satisfying his desires with her more exciting sister. He thought he could maintain his empire while destroying his marriage from the inside. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. As she applied her makeup with the same precision she brought to everything else, Jasmine made a mental list. First, she would confront them, not with tears and accusations, but with cold calculation. She would let them know that she knew, that their secret was no longer secret. Then she would give them a choice. Richard could walk away from everything, the business, the house, the life they'd built together, or she would take it from him piece by piece, publicly and painfully. She suspected she knew which option he would choose. Richard Sterling had never walked away from anything in his life. His pride, his ego, his belief in his own invincibility, they would all work against him now. Which was exactly what Jasmine was counting on. The woman in the mirror smiled back at her, and for the first time in months, Jasmine recognized herself. Not the accommodating wife, not the charitable foundation runner, not the perfect accessory to someone else's success. This was Jasmine Washington Sterling, and she was about to remind everyone, especially her cheating husband, exactly who they were dealing with. The empire he'd built with her help was about to become her weapon of choice, and she was going to enjoy watching it all burn down. Dinner was supposed to be served at 7. Jasmine had spent the afternoon preparing Richard's favorite meal, pan-seared salmon with lemon herb butter, roasted asparagus, and the wild rice pilaf he'd praised on their 3rd anniversary. She'd even opened a bottle of the Chablis they'd brought back from their trip to Burgundy, back when she'd still believed in their future together. Now, as she arranged the place settings with military precision, each fork and knife positioned with the exactness her mother had taught her, Jasmine felt like an actress preparing for the performance of her lifetime. The dining room table could seat 12, but tonight there would only be 3. 3 people, 3 secrets, and enough tension to shatter the crystal stemware. The grandfather clock in the foyer chimed 7 times. Richard was late, as usual, but Keisha was already seated, nervously adjusting her napkin and avoiding Jasmine's gaze. "You look beautiful tonight," Jasmine said, studying her sister across the mahogany expanse. And Keisha did look beautiful. She was wearing a red dress that Jasmine had never seen before, something form-fitting and expensive that hugged her curves in all the right places. Her hair had been professionally styled, and there was a glow to her skin that spoke of recent satisfaction. "Thank you," Keisha murmured, her fingers fidgeting with the gold bracelet on her wrist. "Also new. Also expensive. You look amazing too. I love that dress on you." The black dress. Funeral attire for the death of everything Jasmine had believed about her life. "It's new," Jasmine lied smoothly. "Richard bought it for me last week." She watched Keisha's face carefully, noting the micro-expression of guilt that flickered across her features. He has such good taste, don't you think? Yes. Keisha's voice was barely above a whisper. He does. The front door opened with the electronic beep of the security system being disarmed. Richard's voice carried from the foyer, loud and confident, talking on his phone about quarterly projections and market expansion. He was in his element, commanding and assured, the master of his universe coming home to his perfectly ordered domain. "Sorry I'm late, ladies," he announced as he entered the dining room, still holding his phone. "The Morrison deal is heating up, and you know how these West Coast clients are about time zones." He looked handsome in his charcoal suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, his blue eyes bright with the energy that came from closing big deals and moving millions of dollars with a signature. This was the man Jasmine had fallen in love with, brilliant, ambitious, magnetic in the way that powerful men often were. It was also the man who'd spent the previous night in her sister's bed. "Keisha was just telling me about her shopping trip," Jasmine said as Richard took his seat at the head of the table, positioning himself between the two women like a king flanked by his subjects. "She found some lovely new things." Richard's eyes moved to Keisha's dress, and Jasmine didn't miss the way his gaze lingered, the slight smile that tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Red is definitely your color," he said, his voice carrying an undertone that made Jasmine's stomach clench. "Thank you," Keisha replied, and the look that passed between them lasted exactly 2.3 seconds. Jasmine timed it, the way she'd been timing everything since this afternoon, collecting data like evidence. She served the meal with practiced grace, playing the perfect hostess while studying the subtle dynamics playing out before her. Richard and Keisha were careful not to look at each other directly, but there was an awareness between them, an electric current that hummed beneath the surface of polite dinner conversation. "This salmon is incredible," Richard said, cutting into the fish with surgical precision. "You've outdone yourself, Jas. I'm glad you like it. I used that technique you learned from the cooking class we took in Tuscany. Do you remember that?" "Of course I remember." But his answer came too quickly, too automatically, and Jasmine knew he didn't remember at all. They'd never taken a cooking class in Tuscany. They'd never even been to Tuscany together. "That was such a wonderful trip," she continued, watching his face carefully. "Keisha, you would have loved the little villa we stayed in. Right on the hillside, overlooking the vineyards. We spent hours just sitting on the terrace, planning our future together." Keisha shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "It sounds beautiful." It was. Richard was so romantic that week. He kept talking about the children we'd have someday, the family traditions we'd create. Jasmine's voice remained perfectly steady, but she could see the impact of her words in the way Keisha's fork trembled slightly, in the way Richard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That was a long time ago," Richard said finally. "Was it? Sometimes it feels like yesterday." Jasmine took a sip of wine, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "But I suppose a lot has changed since then. How do you handle it when the people you trust most start keeping secrets from you? Sometimes the betrayal isn't in what they do, but in what they hide. Drop your thoughts below." The conversation limped along through the main course, each exchange loaded with subtext and unspoken tensions. Jasmine asked about Richard's day, and he told elaborate lies about meetings and conference calls. She inquired about Keisha's plans for the weekend, and Keisha mumbled vague responses about maybe visiting friends. They were both terrible liars, Jasmine realized. Or maybe she'd just gotten very good at reading the truth beneath their words. "I have some news," Richard announced as Jasmine cleared the dinner plates. "The Morrison acquisition looks like it's going to go through ahead of schedule. We should know by Friday." "That's wonderful," Jasmine replied, though she knew it wasn't true. She'd read the real Morrison files that afternoon, accessing Richard's secure server using the password he'd never changed, their wedding anniversary. The Morrison deal was in trouble, bleeding money and regulatory challenges. Richard was lying to maintain appearances, the same way he lied about everything else. "What does that mean for the company?" Keisha asked, and Jasmine noticed how her sister leaned forward slightly, genuinely interested in Richard's business affairs. When had Keisha started caring about corporate acquisitions? "It means we're looking at a significant expansion," Richard replied, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used in boardrooms. "New markets, new opportunities. Sterling Industries is positioned to become a major player on the international stage." He was performing for both of them, Jasmine realized. trying to impress his wife with his business acumen while simultaneously seducing her sister with displays of power and success. The irony was almost amusing, if it weren't so pathetic. "That's assuming the due diligence doesn't reveal any surprises," Jasmine said casually, cutting into her salmon. "You know how these international deals can be. One regulatory hiccup, one background check that raises red flags, and everything falls apart." Richard's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "What do you mean?" "Oh, you know, character assessments, moral fitness evaluations. The kind of thing that can derail even the most profitable partnerships if the wrong information comes to light." She met his gaze directly, letting him see something cold and calculating in her eyes. "Personal conduct matters in business, doesn't it?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Richard set down his fork, his blue eyes narrowing as he studied his wife's face. For the first time that evening, Jasmine saw uncertainty flicker across his features. "Yes," he said slowly. "It does." Keisha looked between them, sensing the undercurrent of tension, but not understanding its source. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Jasmine replied, her smile razor-sharp. "I was just thinking about how important trust is in any relationship, business or personal. When trust breaks down, everything else falls apart, doesn't it?" "Jasmine," Richard's voice carried a warning note. "What?" "I'm just making conversation." She took another sip of wine, savoring the way his face had gone pale. "Although I did have an interesting conversation with Patricia Hartwell this afternoon. You remember Patricia, James Hartwell's wife? She called to discuss the Foundation's upcoming charity gala." This was a lie. Jasmine hadn't spoken to Patricia Hartwell, but she could see from Richard's expression that he believed it, that his mind was already racing through the implications of what his wife might have said to the notoriously conservative Mrs. Hartwell. "What did you discuss?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Oh, this and that. She's very interested in family values, as you know. We talked about the importance of setting good examples, especially for people in positions of leadership." Jasmine's smile never wavered. She mentioned how much she admires couples who've built something together, who maintain their integrity even when faced with temptation. Keisha had gone very still, her dinner forgotten as she watched the exchange between her sister and brother-in-law. The guilt was written all over her face now, along with the dawning realization that this conversation was about more than business ethics. "That's nice," Richard managed. "Isn't it?" Patricia also mentioned that Hartwell Corporation is reviewing all their vendor relationships next month. Something about ensuring their partners align with the company's values. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, studying Richard's face with scientific interest. "I told her I was sure Sterling Industries would pass any character evaluation with flying colors. We have nothing to hide, after all." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard's hands were clenched into fists on the table, his knuckles white against the dark wood. Keisha looked like she might be sick, her beautiful face pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. Finally, Richard spoke. "What exactly are you trying to say, Jasmine?" "I'm not trying to say anything, darling. I'm saying it." She stood gracefully, smoothing down her black dress. "I'm saying that I know." The words hung in the air like a blade suspended over both their heads. Keisha made a small, wounded sound, while Richard's face went through a rapid series of expressions: denial, calculation, and finally, resignation. "Know what?" he asked, but the fight had gone out of his voice. Instead of answering, Jasmine reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. She placed it on the table between them, her movements deliberate and controlled. "Security footage from the past 2 months," she said matter-of-factly. "Timestamps, dates, duration of visits. There's also some interesting text message history from a burner phone I found in Keisha's room." She looked at her sister, who had tears streaming down her cheeks. "You really should be more careful about where you hide things." Richard reached for the envelope with shaking hands, but Jasmine placed her palm over it, stopping him. "Before you look at that," she said, her voice deadly calm, "let me explain what's going to happen next. You have a choice, Richard. You can walk away from all of this, the company, the house, the life we built together, and I'll make sure this stays private. Or what?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Or I destroy everything you've worked for, piece by piece, very publicly and very thoroughly." She removed her hand from the envelope, allowing him to see the security footage screenshots visible through the manila paper. "I know about the Morrison deal, the real numbers, not the fantasy projections you've been sharing. I know about the tax haven accounts and the questionable overseas partnerships. I know about the corners you've cut and the rules you've bent to build your empire. Richard's face had gone ashen. You can't. I can. I helped you build it, remember? I know every weakness, every vulnerability, every secret you think you've kept hidden. Jasmine's smile was beautiful and terrible. The only question is whether you want to walk away with your dignity intact, or whether you want me to take it all from you while the whole world watches. Keisha finally found her voice. Jasmine, I'm so sorry. Don't. The word cracked like a whip. Don't you dare apologize to me. Not when you've been sleeping in my house, eating my food, wearing jewelry that he bought you with money from the empire I helped build. It wasn't supposed to happen, Keisha sobbed. It just what? Just happened. Just kept happening for 2 months. Just happened in the bed I decorated for you when you needed a place to stay. Jasmine's composure finally cracked, revealing the fury beneath. You're my sister, Keisha. My blood. And you did this to me. Richard stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This is insane. You can't just. I can't what? Defend myself. Fight back when the 2 people I trusted most in the world decided to betray me. Jasmine laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. You have no idea what I'm capable of, Richard. You've never bothered to find out. You saw what you wanted to see, the dutiful wife, the charity foundation runner, the perfect accessory to your success. She walked around the table until she was standing directly in front of him, close enough to see the fear in his eyes. But I'm not just your wife, Richard. I'm Jasmine Washington Sterling. I graduated summa cum laude from Howard with a degree in economics. I have an MBA from Wharton. I helped build your empire from the ground up, and I can tear it down just as easily. Her voice dropped to a whisper. The only question is whether you're smart enough to walk away while you still can. The grandfather clock chimed 8 times, marking the end of what would be their last family dinner. In the silence that followed, Jasmine could see Richard's mind working, calculating odds and weighing options the way he always did when faced with a business decision. She almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then she remembered the timestamp, 2:47 a.m. She remembered her sister's laughter echoing through the halls of her own home. She remembered 8 years of marriage built on what she now knew were lies. You have until tomorrow night to decide, she said, stepping back from the table. Walk away, or watch me take everything. Without another word, she left them sitting there, her cheating husband and traitorous sister, surrounded by the ruins of the family dinner she'd prepared with her own hands. The real game was just beginning. Richard didn't come to bed that night. Jasmine lay in their king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling sheet had painted the exact shade of cream that would complement the Italian marble fireplace, listening to the sound of her husband's footsteps pacing back and forth in his study downstairs. The grandfather clock chimed midnight, then 1, then 2. At 2:47 a.m., the exact time she'd watched him sneak to Keisha's room for months, she heard his footsteps on the stairs. But they didn't turn toward the guest wing. They came to their bedroom door, where they stopped. She could feel him standing there, could imagine him with his hand on the doorknob, calculating whether to enter and face his wife or retreat to the couch in his office. The doorknob turned slowly, and Richard slipped inside like a thief in his own home. I know you're awake, he whispered into the darkness. Jasmine didn't respond. Let him sweat. We need to talk. No, she said finally, her voice cutting through the dark like a blade. We needed to talk 2 months ago. What we need now is for you to make your choice. She heard him sink into the leather armchair by the window, the same chair where he used to sit and watch her get ready in the mornings, back when he'd still pretended to love her. I can't just walk away from everything I've built, he said, and even in the darkness, she could hear the defeat in his voice. Sterling Industries isn't just a company, Jasmine. It's my legacy. It's who I am. Then you've made your choice. There has to be another way. We can work this out. Go to counseling, start over. Jasmine sat up in bed, her silk nightgown catching the moonlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Start over? You want to start over after you've been sleeping with my sister for 2 months. It wasn't. It didn't mean anything. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness. 43 separate moments of weakness, according to the security footage. Her voice was clinical, detached, the way she sounded when presenting quarterly reports to the foundation board. The longest one lasted 2 hours and 14 minutes. That's not a moment, Richard. That's a relationship. He was quiet for so long that she thought he might have left. Then she heard him speak, his voice so low she had to strain to hear it. I love you, Jasmine. I've always loved you. No, you don't. She turned on the bedside lamp, flooding the room with soft golden light. Richard looked haggard, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled from a day of crisis management. You love the idea of me. You love having the beautiful, intelligent black wife who looks good at charity galas and makes you seem progressive and enlightened. You love having someone who's smart enough to help build your empire, but grateful enough to never challenge your authority. That's not true. Isn't it? When was the last time you asked for my opinion on a business decision? When was the last time you introduced me as anything other than my wife who runs our foundation? When was the last time you saw me as an equal partner instead of a beautiful accessory? Richard's silence was answer enough. Jasmine stood and walked to her closet, pulling out a green silk blouse, the same one she'd worn yesterday morning when her world had still made sense. I'm going to get dressed, and then I'm going to my office to start making some phone calls. By the time the markets open, everyone who matters in your business world is going to know exactly what kind of man Richard Sterling really is. You can't do this. He stood as well, his voice taking on the commanding tone he used in boardrooms. I won't let you destroy everything we've worked for out of spite. Jasmine laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. Spite? You think this is about spite? She turned to face him, and he took an involuntary step backward at the cold fury in her eyes. This is about justice, Richard. This is about consequences. This is about a man who thought he could have everything, the empire, the perfect wife, and the affair on the side, without ever having to pay the price. She began getting dressed with methodical precision, each movement calculated and controlled. You made your choice the first night you walked into Keisha's room. I'm just making sure you live with the consequences. I'll fight you, he said, but the threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. I have lawyers, resources. You have lawyers who work for Sterling Industries, a company that's about to be very busy dealing with federal investigations, lost contracts, and fleeing investors. Jasmine buttoned her blouse with the same care she'd once used to serve his coffee. As for resources, well, we'll see how many of those you have left when I'm done. She walked past him toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Richard, you might want to check on Keisha. I believe she's packing. The next few hours were a blur of controlled destruction. Jasmine sat in her office as the sun rose over Atlanta, systematically dismantling her husband's empire with the precision of a master surgeon. Each phone call, each email, each carefully leaked piece of information was designed to cause maximum damage while keeping her own hands clean. First, she called Senator Patricia Morrison, wife of the defense contractor whose company was supposed to merge with Sterling Industries. Patricia was a formidable woman who'd built her own political career on family values and moral leadership. The conversation was brief and devastating. Patricia, it's Jasmine Sterling. I wanted to give you a personal heads up about some information that's going to become public regarding my husband's conduct. No, I understand completely. Yes, I think postponing any business arrangements would be wise until this is resolved. Next, she reached out to James Hartwell himself, catching him during his morning workout at the private club they all belonged to. James, I hope I'm not calling too early. Yes, it's about the Sterling Industries contract. I felt I owed it to you and Patricia to let you know personally that there are some character issues that have come to light. Of course, I understand your position completely. Family values have always been important to both our families. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Jasmine would express her regret, hint at the moral implications without being specific, and then sit back while powerful people made their own conclusions and took their own protective actions. By 9 a.m., when Richard finally emerged from their bedroom looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight, 3 major contracts had been postponed pending review, and 2 international partners had requested emergency conferences to reassess their strategic relationships. He found her in the kitchen, calmly preparing breakfast as if it were any other morning. What have you done? His voice was hoarse, exhausted. I made coffee. She gestured to the French press on the counter. Your usual, 2 sugars, splash of cream. I thought you might need the caffeine. Jasmine, please. We can still fix this. I'll end things with Keisha. We'll go to therapy. I'll do whatever it takes. It's too late for that. She poured herself a cup of coffee, savoring the rich aroma. Patricia Morrison called off the defense contract merger 30 minutes ago. James Hartwell is convening an emergency board meeting to discuss severing ties with Sterling Industries. And I believe your international partners are currently in crisis mode trying to figure out how to distance themselves from the scandal that's about to break. Richard sank into one of the kitchen chairs, his face pale. How did you? The information isn't even public yet. Isn't it? Jasmine pulled out her phone and showed him the screen. Marcus Williams from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution is running a story in tomorrow's edition. Power couple's perfect marriage hides ugly truth. Sterling Industries CEO's affair rocks business world. He had some very interesting questions about your business practices. By the way, you talked to a reporter. Richard's voice rose in panic. Do you have any idea what this will do to the stock price? I imagine it will do terrible things to the stock price. Jasmine's voice was conversational, as if they were discussing the weather, especially when combined with the leaked financial documents showing that the Morrison acquisition was never as profitable as you claimed. Those documents are confidential. Were confidential. Amazing what public records requests can uncover when you know where to look. She took a sip of coffee, studying his face over the rim of her mug. Did you know that your tax haven arrangements in the Cayman Islands violate the spirit, if not the letter, of several federal regulations? The IRS found that information quite fascinating. Richard's phone began buzzing against the marble countertop. Then it started ringing. Within minutes, the sound was constant. Calls, texts, emails pouring in as the business world woke up to the reality that Sterling Industries was in free fall. Answer it, Jasmine suggested. It's probably your board of directors. They'll want to discuss damage control, crisis management, maybe a temporary leave of absence while things get sorted out. You can't do this, he said again, but the words carried no conviction. This affects you too. Your foundation, your social standing. My foundation? Jasmine laughed. Oh, Richard. My foundation is going to be fine. In fact, I spoke with several major donors this morning. They are quite supportive of an innocent wife whose charitable work shouldn't suffer because of her husband's moral failings. There was even talk of increasing contributions to help me through this difficult time. She had played this perfectly, she realized. By positioning herself as the wronged wife rather than the vengeful ex-partner, she'd gained sympathy instead of suspicion. The foundation would not only survive but thrive as donors rallied around her cause. Have you ever had to choose between revenge and redemption? Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who underestimate us completely. What would you have done in Jasmine's position? Richard's phone continued its relentless chorus of notifications. Each buzz, each ring was another piece of his empire crumbling. Jasmine watched him scroll through the messages, his face growing paler with each one. The Shanghai partnership is pulling out, he said, his voice barely audible. Effective immediately. I imagine they are. Foreign investors don't like uncertainty, especially when it involves moral scandals and potential federal investigations. Federal investigations. He looked up from his phone, terror in his eyes. Well, when you lose major government contracts due to character concerns, people start asking questions. The Defense Department is particularly thorough when it comes to security clearances and moral fitness evaluations. Jasmine finished her coffee and rinsed the mug in the sink with careful precision. I believe they are sending investigators to review your clearance status sometime this week. Richard's phone rang again. This time, Jasmine could see the caller ID. Board Chairman, Robert Hayes. You should answer that, she said. Bob's probably wondering if the rumors about your resignation are true. Resignation? Richard's voice cracked. I haven't resigned. Haven't you? From what I understand, the board is meeting in emergency session this afternoon to discuss your future with the company. Apparently, someone leaked information suggesting that you might be stepping down to focus on personal matters. Someone leaked? You mean you leaked? I didn't leak anything specific. I simply suggested to Bob Hayes that he might want to have contingency plans in place, given the instability surrounding the company's leadership. Jasmine's smile was sharp as a blade. He's a smart man. He drew his own conclusions. The phone continued ringing. Richard stared at it like it was a snake, then finally answered. Bob, yes, I got your messages. No, I haven't made any decisions about. What do you mean the stock is down 18%? It's only 9:30 in the morning. Jasmine left him to his crisis management and walked upstairs to her office. Through the window, She could see the news vans already gathering at the gates of their exclusive neighborhood. Word traveled fast in Atlanta's business community, and the fall of Richard Sterling was exactly the kind of story that sold newspapers and generated clicks. Her computer chimed with a new email. Marcus Williams from the Journal-Constitution. Mrs. Sterling, I wanted to thank you for your time yesterday. The story is generating significant interest. Would you be available for a follow-up interview this afternoon? She hadn't given Marcus Williams an interview yesterday. She'd simply made sure that he received certain documents through anonymous channels, along with suggestions about which sources might be worth investigating. But if he wanted to credit her with cooperation, she wasn't going to correct him. Another email, this one from Patricia Hartwell. Dearest Jasmine, I was so sorry to hear about your troubles. Please know that you have my complete support. Perhaps we could have lunch next week to discuss how the community can rally around you during this difficult time. And another, from Senator Morrison. Jasmine, I want you to know that your courage in coming forward is admirable. Women like us must support each other when men fail to live up to their responsibilities. She was being hailed as the brave wife who'd exposed corruption rather than the vengeful woman who'd destroyed her husband's empire. The narrative was writing itself exactly as she'd planned. Richard appeared in her doorway, his phone still pressed to his ear, his face grim. The board wants me to take a leave of absence, he said when he finally hung up. Indefinitely, while they conduct their own investigation into my conduct and its impact on the company. That sounds reasonable, Jasmine replied without looking up from her computer. Reasonable. It's my company, Jasmine. I built it from nothing. You built it with help. My help. And now I'm taking it apart. She finally turned to face him, and he flinched at the cold satisfaction in her eyes. This is what happens when you underestimate people, Richard. This is what happens when you think you can betray someone and they'll just accept it quietly. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did hurt me. You hurt me every single night for 2 months when you left our bed to sleep with my sister. You hurt me every morning when you looked me in the eye and lied about where you'd been. You hurt me every time you made me feel like I wasn't enough, like I wasn't worthy of your faithfulness. Her voice remained steady, controlled, but Richard could see the pain beneath the vengeance. You turned my own sister against me, in my own home, with money from the empire I helped you build. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences? Richard's phone buzzed again. This time it was a text message, and Jasmine could see his face change as he read it. What now? She asked. Keisha. He looked up from the phone, confusion and hurt warring in his expression. She's gone. Left sometime this morning. She says she can't be part of this anymore. Jasmine felt a stab of something that might have been pain, quickly buried beneath layers of righteous anger. Even now, even after everything, Keisha's abandonment hurt. Smart girl, she said finally. She knows when to cut her losses. Where does this end, Jasmine? When will you be satisfied? She considered the question seriously, looking out at the news vans gathering like vultures outside their gates. When you have nothing left. When you're sitting in a studio apartment somewhere, wondering how the man who once commanded $1 billion empire ended up with nothing but regrets and consequences. And then what? You'll have your revenge, but you'll also be alone. We'll both be alone. For the first time since this had begun, Jasmine felt a flicker of something other than cold satisfaction. But she pushed it down, buried it beneath the memory of watching him disappear into Keisha's room at 2:47 a.m. I'd rather be alone than be with someone who sees me as a fool. Richard's phone rang again. This time he didn't answer it. He just stood there, staring at his wife across the office that had once been their shared sanctuary, watching the final pieces of his world crumble around him. I'm sorry, he said finally. For all of it. For hurting you. For betraying your trust. For throwing away everything we built together. I'm sorry, Jasmine. She looked at him for a long moment. This man she'd loved for 12 years, married for 8, helped to build into the powerful figure he'd become. She looked at him and felt nothing. The love was gone, burned away by months of deception. The anger would fade eventually. But the satisfaction of watching him face the consequences of his choices, that would last forever. I know you are, she said. But sorry doesn't fix what you broke. Sorry doesn't give me back the months you spent making a fool of me. Sorry doesn't erase the fact that you chose her over me, over us, over everything we'd built together. She turned back to her computer, dismissing him as thoroughly as he'd dismissed her marriage. Your empire is falling, Richard. And I'm going to enjoy watching every minute of it. As he left her office for what they both knew would be the last time, Jasmine allowed herself a small, cold smile. By tomorrow, Richard Sterling would be just another cautionary tale about power, hubris, and the dangerous game of underestimating the woman who helped build your world. The Queen had taken the king. Game over. 6 months later, Jasmine Washington stood in the penthouse office of the newly renamed Washington Foundation, watching the Atlanta skyline sparkle in the late afternoon sun. She'd dropped the Sterling from her name the day the divorce was finalized, reclaiming the identity she'd carried long before she'd ever met Richard. The irony wasn't lost on her that this office was located just 3 blocks from the Sterling Industries building, or what used to be the Sterling Industries building. The company had been dissolved after the federal investigation uncovered a web of tax evasion, regulatory violations, and questionable overseas partnerships. The building now housed a tech startup run by a young black woman who'd pitched Jasmine on the idea during one of the foundation's entrepreneur mentorship sessions. Mrs. Washington. Her assistant, Maya Chen, appeared in the doorway. "The Forbes reporter is here for your interview." Jasmine smoothed her emerald green dress, a color she'd reclaimed as her own after months of wearing funeral black, and nodded. "Send her in." The reporter was younger than she'd expected, probably in her early 30s, with the eager energy of someone still hungry to make her mark. "Mrs. Washington, thank you so much for agreeing to this interview. The business world has been fascinated by your story, how you've transformed personal tragedy into professional triumph." Personal tragedy. That was how the media had framed it. The devoted wife who'd been betrayed by her husband and sister, who'd courageously exposed corruption while building something better from the ashes. It was true, as far as it went. But it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that Jasmine had systematically destroyed a man who'd underestimated her, and she'd enjoyed every moment of it. "Please, call me Jasmine," she said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "And I wouldn't call it tragedy. I'd call it awakening." Awakening. For too many years, I allowed myself to be defined by someone else's vision of who I should be. The dutiful wife, the supportive partner, the woman behind the man. Jasmine's voice carried the confidence of someone who'd learned exactly what she was capable of. "What happened with Richard and my sister forced me to remember who I was before I became half of someone else's equation." "And who is that?" "Someone who graduated summa cum laude from Howard with a degree in economics. Someone who earned an MBA from Wharton. Someone who helped build a billion-dollar empire and who can build another one, this time, on my own terms." The Washington Foundation had indeed become an empire, but one built on empowerment rather than exploitation. In the 6 months since Richard's fall, Jasmine had transformed it from a traditional charity into a venture capital fund focused on supporting women and minority entrepreneurs. They'd funded 4 to 7 startups, created over 2,000 jobs, and generated returns that had attracted investment from major institutions. "Some people have suggested that your success is built on revenge," the reporter said carefully. "That you've profited from your ex-husband's downfall." Jasmine smiled, the expression sharp but not unkind. "Success is the best revenge, isn't it? But what I've built isn't about Richard Sterling anymore. It's about the next generation of entrepreneurs who won't have to choose between their integrity and their ambitions." Speaking of Richard Sterling, do you know what he's doing now? Jasmine did know. Richard was living in a modest apartment in Decatur, working as a consultant for small businesses. The federal investigation had cleared him of criminal wrongdoing. His violations had been technical rather than fraudulent, but his reputation was destroyed. No major corporation would touch him. No investor would trust him with significant capital. He'd lost everything: the mansion, the cars, the lifestyle, the social standing. The only thing he'd kept was his freedom, and even that came with restrictions. His security clearance had been permanently revoked, barring him from any government contract work. "I wish him well," Jasmine said, and was surprised to find that she mostly meant it. The white-hot anger that had sustained her through those first few months had cooled into something more manageable, not forgiveness, exactly, but a kind of professional detachment. Richard Sterling was no longer her problem to solve or her enemy to destroy. He was simply irrelevant. "And your sister, Keisha?" That question still stung, even after all this time. Keisha had disappeared that morning 6 months ago, leaving behind only a note that Jasmine had never shown to anyone. "I'm sorry doesn't fix what I broke, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right somehow. I love you, sis. I always have." Jasmine had hired investigators to find her, not for revenge but for closure. Keisha was living in Portland, working as a server in a small restaurant, sharing a studio apartment with 2 other women. She'd gotten rid of all the expensive gifts Richard had bought her, donated them to charity and sent Jasmine the receipts along with a cashier's check for the estimated value. "We're not in contact," Jasmine said simply. Some betrayals cut too deep for simple apologies to heal. After the interview, Jasmine stood alone in her office, watching the sun set over the city she was helping to reshape. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. "The New York Times wants to interview you about the Women's Entrepreneur Network. And Oprah's people called. They are interested in featuring you on the show." Oprah. Jasmine allowed herself a small smile. A year ago, she'd been known primarily as Richard Sterling's wife. Now she was being courted by media outlets as a business leader in her own right. Her personal phone, the one she kept for family and close friends, chimed with a different kind of message. It was from her mother's sister in D.C. "Saw you on CNN today. Your parents would be so proud of the woman you've become. Dinner next time you're in town." The message hit harder than she'd expected. Her parents had died when she was 25, just a year before she'd met Richard. They'd never seen her marry into wealth, never seen her play the role of the perfect corporate wife. But they had seen her graduate from Howard, had watched her excel in her MBA program, had believed in her potential before anyone else did. They would be proud, she realized. Not of the revenge. Her mother had always believed in taking the high road, but of what she'd built from the wreckage. They would be proud that their daughter had remembered who she was underneath all the roles other people had asked her to play. How do you rebuild your life after betrayal? Sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what you're truly capable of. What dreams have you put aside for someone else's vision of your life? A knock on the office door interrupted her thoughts. Maya appeared again, looking slightly uncertain. "I'm sorry to bother you, but there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's personal." Jasmine frowned. Did she give a name? Keisha Washington. The name hit Jasmine like a physical blow. For 6 months, she'd wondered what she would do if this moment came. For 6 months, she'd alternated between hoping for it and dreading it. Send her in. Keisha looked different. Thinner, older, her natural hair cropped short in a style that made her look younger and more vulnerable than the glamorous woman who'd worn red dresses to family dinners. She was dressed simply, jeans, a plain white t-shirt, sneakers that had seen better days. No makeup, no jewelry except for the small gold studs in her ears that had been a gift from their mother. "Hello, Jasmine." Keisha. The name felt strange in her mouth, like a word from a foreign language she'd once known but had forgotten how to speak. They stood there for a long moment, sisters separated by 6 months and a betrayal that had redefined both their lives. Finally, Keisha spoke. "I know I have no right to be here. I know you probably never want to see me again. But I needed to tell you something. I'm listening. I'm proud of you." The words came out in a rush, as if Keisha had been holding them back for months. "What you've built, what you've accomplished, it's incredible. You always were the smart one, the strong one, but I don't think even I understood how remarkable you are until I saw what you did after everything." Jasmine felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but her voice remained steady. "Is that why you came? To congratulate me on my success?" "No." Keisha took a shaky breath. "I came to tell you that what happened between Richard and me, it wasn't about you not being enough. It was about me feeling like I was never enough. You were always the perfect daughter, the brilliant student, the successful wife. And I was just the scroop little sister who needed rescuing. So you decided to sleep with my husband. I decided to take something that was yours because I thought it would make me feel powerful for once." Keisha's eyes filled with tears. "I thought if I could make a man like Richard Sterling want me, it would prove that I was worth something. But all it proved was that I was exactly the selfish, destructive person I'd always been afraid I was." Jasmine studied her sister's face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-pity. But all she saw was genuine remorse and a kind of hollow exhaustion that spoke of months spent facing hard truths. "Where have you been living?" she asked finally. "Portland. I'm working at a restaurant, going to therapy twice a week, trying to figure out how to be a better person." Keisha wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Jas. I know what I did is unforgivable. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, and that I'm trying to make amends somehow." "How?" "I testified in the federal investigation. Told them everything I knew about Richard's business practices, the things he said when he thought no one was listening. Keisha's voice was barely above a whisper. I know it doesn't undo what I did to you, but maybe it helped with what you were trying to do to him. It had helped, though Jasmine had never known where the information had come from. Anonymous testimony had provided crucial details about Richard's overseas partnerships and tax strategies, information that had sealed his fate with federal regulators. Why? Jasmine asked. Because you deserved justice. Because what we did to you was wrong, and I couldn't just run away and pretend it never happened. Keisha straightened her shoulders, and for a moment, Jasmine saw a glimpse of the strong woman her sister might become. I destroyed my relationship with the person I love most in the world. The least I could do was help destroy the man who convinced me it was worth it. They stood in silence for another long moment. Outside, the city lights were beginning to twinkle as Atlanta settled into evening. Somewhere out there, Richard Sterling was probably sitting in his small apartment, wondering how his empire had crumbled so completely. Somewhere else, investors and entrepreneurs were building new dreams with funding from the Washington Foundation. And here, in this office that Jasmine had built from the ashes of her old life, two sisters were trying to figure out if love could survive betrayal. I can't forgive you, Jasmine said finally. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Keisha nodded, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. I understand. But... Jasmine paused, choosing her words carefully. I don't want you to disappear from my life completely. We're the only family each other has left. What does that mean? It means when you're ready to come back to Atlanta, when you've done the work you need to do on yourself, maybe we can try to figure out what being sisters looks like now. Jasmine's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking slightly. It won't be the same. It can't be. But maybe it can be something. Keisha broke down completely then, sobbing in a way that reminded Jasmine of the 16-year-old girl who'd cried in her arms after their parents' funeral. Without thinking, Jasmine stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her sister, holding her the way she'd held her through every crisis, every heartbreak, every moment when the world had seemed too big and too cruel. I'm so sorry, Keisha whispered against her shoulder. I'm so sorry. I know, Jasmine whispered back. I know you are. They held each other in the gathering darkness, two women who'd lost everything and were slowly, carefully, trying to figure out how to build something new from the wreckage. Later, after Keisha had left with promises to stay in touch and continue therapy, Jasmine sat alone in her office and thought about forgiveness. She wasn't there yet, might never be completely there, but she was beginning to understand that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting or excusing what had been done to her. It was about refusing to let someone else's betrayal define the rest of her life. Richard Sterling had underestimated her, had seen her as nothing more than a beautiful accessory to his success. Keisha had betrayed the trust that came with being family. Both of them had tried to make her smaller than she was, to reduce her to something they could use or discard as they saw fit. But Jasmine Washington had refused to stay small. She'd taken the pain and the rage and the devastating knowledge of their betrayal, and she'd used it to build something bigger and better than anything she'd had before. The empire Richard had built with her help was gone, scattered to the winds of federal investigation and public scandal. But the empire Jasmine had built from its ashes, that was something entirely different. That was something that belonged to her alone, something that reflected her values and her vision and her refusal to be defined by anyone else's limitations. Her phone buzzed one last time. A text from Maya. The Oprah interview is confirmed for next month. They want to focus on your journey from betrayal to empowerment. The working title is Rising from the Ashes, How One Woman Turned Devastation into Triumph. Jasmine smiled and typed back, Perfect. That's exactly what it is. She gathered her things and prepared to leave the office, turning off the lights and locking the door behind her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to build something meaningful from the foundation she'd laid. But tonight, as she walked out into the Atlanta evening, Jasmine Washington felt something she hadn't felt in years, complete ownership of her own life. She was no longer Richard Sterling's wife or even Keisha's sister. She was herself, fully and finally, and that self was more powerful than she'd ever imagined possible. The woman who'd once served coffee with sterling silver spoons was gone. In her place stood someone who'd learned that the most devastating betrayals could become the most liberating gifts, if you were strong enough to use them that way. And Jasmine Washington was definitely strong enough. She'd proven that beyond any shadow of a doubt. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most end up giving us the greatest gift, The chance to discover who we really are when we stop trying to be who they need us to be. What would you rebuild from the ashes of betrayal? Your journey to reclaiming your power starts with one decision. Will you let someone else's failure define you, or will you use it to build something extraordinary?
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.